John Medwedeff. I'm a sculptor and artist, metalsmith, live in Southern Illinois in the United States. If you want to go way back, as a child, I had a fantastic opportunity going back, and this is, when I was 8, 9 years old, taking art lessons. There was a woman an artist in our town. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, named Christine Sladen Tibbett, and she was in her day job a set designer for a popular television show that ran for 20 years. That was goofy. It was called Hee Haw. It was sort of a country music version of Laugh-In, if you will, that was popular in the United States, and it's still published here and there. But on Saturday, she had art lessons at her house for little kids, and she is probably one of the most creative people I have ever known in my life, and had more energy than an average 50 people combined. She had these classes on Saturday mornings and turned a generation of kids in West Nashville into professional artists. It's uncanny how many people trace their beginning of their art careers back to her Saturday morning classes. Ironically, my wife was also one of those students. So I've known her for way longer than most people would know their spouse. My sisters took those classes. One of my sisters became a professional artist. So that was my beginning. My mother reserved a room in our house for making and art making and building, and we always had projects going on. She let us play with broken glass and polyester resins and all sorts of stuff. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a physician, but as well was a talented woodworker and furniture builder. So I was always around those things. My father was a dentist, and today dentistry is done very differently. They scan your tooth and they email a image to a lab, and a new tooth is 3D printed. But back in the day, my father took the molds, did the gold work, built the bridges, and inserted those in the patient's teeth. And so he had casting equipment, metalworking equipment in his office. So I would hang around his office, and I was casting metal when I was 9, doing stuff like that. I made wire sculptures and this and that all through high school. I think I bought my first anvil when I was 14, and I was just really into making things and working with metal in a very primitive, unschooled way, if you will. When I was approaching graduation from high school, I had it in my mind that I'd want to become an architect, and I actually had sort of drifted away. I struggled with math, and which is kind of ironic now, but I struggled with math in school, and I had it in my head that if you had to be, some kind of math genius to be an architect. Having worked with a lot of architects since then, I understood that's not really true. My older sister had graduated from art school in Memphis, and was making a living as a graphic designer, and encouraged me because I had, reasonably good drawing skills, that might be a possibility for me. So I chose to go to the Memphis Academy of Arts and study graphic design. Within the first year, I met the metalsmithing teacher there, and I never looked back. My sophomore year of college, I had an opportunity to take a night class with Jim Wallace, who was the director of the Metal Museum in Memphis. And it was a brand new fledgling shoestring operation of a museum that had been really initially started by an organization called the National and Ornamental and Miscellaneous Metals Association, which is a trade group for companies that do everything from ornamental iron to chain link fences and whatnot. Those guys certainly didn't envision where the Metals Museum would go. It became more of an art museum over the last 40 years. that I had an opportunity to take this blacksmithing class, and the first time I hit a piece of hot metal at age 19, I was hooked. That experience informed me that I had found the connection between metalsmithing and sculpture, and intuitively, I saw grand things without really knowing what they were. It was just sort of a feeling, and I followed it, and I never looked back. I continued to study at the Memphis Academy of Arts for a little while, became an apprentice at the Metal Museum, and eventually I transferred to Memphis State University to finish my undergraduate work. And then I was offered a scholarship at Southern Illinois University to finish my undergraduate degree. And the connection between the Metals Museum and Southern Illinois University is Brent Kington was a professor in metals who in 1969 invited a guy that had written a book about blacksmithing to come show his graduate students in metals how to forge. And this was unprecedented. There's, to this day, there's no other school in the United States that has blacksmithing as a focus in their master's degree program for art. So Jim Wallace, who was the director of the museum, had been a student there, had worked with the curator Everett Johnson to have an exhibition in 1976 called Iron Solid Wrought. And that experience was the credential that landed Jim as the director of the museum when those guys in Memphis wanted to start that museum. So I had this fantastic opportunity to work in a fledgling museum, starting from almost from scratch. I was 3 years old when I went to work there. And I was there for 3 years, a little over 3 years before Brent offered me the scholarship opportunity at SIU. So I transferred to Carbondale, finished my undergraduate degree, started my master's degree, and then started my studio business in 1988. So I've been doing that ever since. The first year, I nearly starved to death. It was hard to. It was before internet. It was before. It's hard to imagine, but we didn't have email. Fax machines weren't really even a thing. And the town I live in is a small rural town. It sort of felt like there was a party going on somewhere else, and I had not gotten invited. But somewhere around 1990, through a project in St. Louis, I met an interior designer named Jed Johnson, who had a large design firm in New York. And that really got my business going. I worked with Jed Johnson Associates almost exclusively for, I don't know, maybe 6 years or so. Tragically, Jed died in a plane crash. It was the TWA-800 flight that was on its way to Paris that crashed. He was on one of the passengers. Jed was a remarkable individual. He was also very connected with everyone in New York. He had been Andy Warhol's partner for many years, and he was a very talented guy. So it was a tragic loss. And at the time, most of my business had been through his office. But I was also starting my public art career. I think in 1996, I had a first opportunity to do a piece of public art for the state of Illinois. And that was a new experience and not something I had initially really thought of. I always wanted to do sculpture, but I assumed that making sculpture was maybe not a full-time job. Like I had approached my metalworking career as from a more functional standpoint, making gates, railings, chandeliers, furniture, and I really enjoy that work, and I still do. But my true passion was sculpture. I just didn't realize that that could be a full-time career. I got my first public art commission through Illinois art and architecture program through the state government, and that was 30 or more commissions ago. So the first one's probably the hardest one to get, and then I went from there. I had a commission with the John Deere company. They make tractors and whatnot. They wanted giant farm crops for their reconstruction of a pavilion on the original site of the John Deere factory. And since John Deere was a blacksmith and they wanted sculpture, they thought they should call a blacksmith who makes sculpture. And I got a call about that. And that project really sort of changed the way that I approach making art. They wanted these sculptures of giant farm crops. When I first got that phone call, I was thinking maybe this is a joke. What kind of question is this? And then when I realized, wow, this is a real thing, and the opportunity to make sculpture for John Deere was very intriguing. I won this, I don't really win a competition. I just was granted the commission. And I started thinking about how am I going to approach this? And I realized that farmers are going to be looking at these sculptures. They've got to be accurate. And so I actually started dissecting plant material, cotton, corn, wheat, looking at it under magnification. My experience with that changed my entire approach to building. The work is always and continuously informed by working with hot metal. If you have a piece of steel in a forge, when you pull it out of the fire, it is malleable and plastic. You can make graceful curves. You can change the cross sections of those materials. So that's the part of the underlying focus of my design. But when I started looking at these plants, I realized that these were structures made of membranes, and they were strong and they were flexible. At the same time, this is 1998 or so, I was moving my business out of an old shoe factory building to a building in a steel metal building that we were building in a local industrial park. And I realized the connection between the engineering and the architecture of a steel building. One of my friends that's an engineer says, what bends doesn't break. And it's flexible, but it's really strong. There's a minimal amount of material used in a steel building. And they flex with the wind, they move just like a piece of grass. There's some internal structure, if you will, the skeleton and the skin, and the way it integrates those structures and their different properties creates a substantially strong structure. So pretty quickly, in fact, the model behind me, you see that piece right here, was designed for the city of Memphis, and it sits up on the river bluff. Was really one of the early pieces where I started to pull all this together and sort of set the course for most of my work over the last, 25 years or so. So I work with flat pieces of steel for the most part in the sculpture that we, cut into very specific and calculated shapes. And then we, using plate rolls and presses, form these pieces, and there's nothing random about it. It's a lot of design work and planning goes into the build. I think in a previous question you had asked me if I had some training in architecture, and by experience, just working with it. But I do think of these pieces kind of like buildings. There is an architectural quality. Each sculpture has its own narrative of structure that I sort of have in my mind my own sort of personal grammar of form, and I work within some parameters, but in the principle of it is to get strength and flexibility in big forms through opposing compound curves. I really work hard that a sculpture does not have a specific front or back. And when I hear people arguing about which is the front or the back, I know I've done my job. Sculpture is to be seen from all angles, unless it's a wall piece. And one of the things that I find intriguing is I can make a sculpture that if photographed from 2 or 3 different angles may not even look like the same piece, but as you walk around it, it's a very cohesive composition. One line may lead to another line or have the illusion of that. I kind of love those kind of visual opportunities to, create intriguing structures and forms.
Doing public art, is it more demanding than doing private art?
Uh, hmm. The the business arrangement of dealing with public art is very different. But once once I get to the art making part, it's all the same. I I am a happy guy if I've got some metal to work with. Um, Certain clients are, wonderful to work with and have become lifelong friends. So that's something that really doesn't happen in public art so much. Uh, but they're very different. They're different things. And then another aspect of that are maybe large sculpture that are appear to be public art, but may be commissioned by a corporation, such a John Deere. I've worked for a real estate developer. I've done uh, some piece, bigger sculpture for residences. So the art making is it's all the same. Once I get invested into the project, I'm thinking about the sculpture. I'm thinking about the dynamics of the form and the lines, and I get hyper focused on every little detail. Um, Public art is a interesting process in that no two commissions are exactly the same as far as how they're structured, or at least within different jurisdictions. I find the state of Illinois may approach it differently than the state of Florida or something, but um, typically there is a call to artists that is published, and it may be 100, 200, 300 people may apply for these projects. So it's very competitive, enormously competitive. If you're going to make a living as a sculptor doing public art, you've got to have a pretty thick skin, because you're going to get a lot of rejection letters. My wife and I, she helps me in the business. We send out RFQ, answers for these called artists weekly. We did 2 of them last night on Friday night. We know how to have fun. And so out of the pool of people that will apply, a selection committee will go through, and they will usually pick finalists, sometimes more. And at that point, the finalists are asked to create a model and give the selection committee a presentation. So the models you see behind me are all result of those type of circumstances. And I feel like I do well at that level, because as a background as a metalsmith, I have a level of craftsmanship and exacting that a lot of sculptors don't have. So I think it's relatively easy for me to communicate my ideas to a selection committee, just based on my approach to presenting the work. And the models take a lot of time. So it's a little bit of a high stakes game. You're going to invest a lot of work into building one of these models and being involved in that process. It's both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. And I sort of think of it as, you know, if an athlete goes to the Olympics, there's a lot of time and preparation, and they may win a gold medal and they may go home empty-handed. It's kind of similar. Part of me, I enjoy the competition of it, and I sort of hate it at the same time, because it's you know, it's never convenient. We're always in the middle of another project or finishing another project, and I never know when I'm going to get one of these calls that say, congratulations, you're a finalist. So you got a lot of hoops to jump through really fast usually. So it's a little bit of a crazy lifestyle. A lot of people that are involved in public art may be working as a designer, they may be working as a university professor or whatnot, and if they don't win a commission, it may not matter as much. But I run a fabrication facility, I have employees, I've got to keep the ball rolling, I have a responsibility then for people's jobs. And so that's the stuff they didn't tell you about in art school. It is a business. We have to be constantly productive. So I don't really take much time off. And there's an old expression, if you love your work, how does that go? I forget. I can't remember how that goes. Oh, if you love your job, you'll never work a day in your life, or something like that. So I'm fortunate that I really do love what I do, and because it is a constant effort. There's no letting up. You're always hustling and always busy to create the next thing. When I design a sculpture, usually it means I have to somewhat sequester myself in a room for a week or two and just do nothing but work and work and work. And I can make shapes all day long, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a sculpture. There's, in that process, I sometimes feel like I'm just hitting the wall. Like, I don't have an idea what is wrong with this. And then all of a sudden it'll click, but it doesn't do that until you put in the time and made the effort to get a composition going, get a feel for the piece. And a lot of that is responding to the criteria that's laid out by the selection committee. You're responding to the site. What's the architecture around that site? What's the climate? How do people socially interact with these pieces? So those are all factors that go into creating those designs. Of course, you have to think about what is the budget being offered and logistics of transporting the work and installing it. So every commission, it really has a different set of challenges. So that's part of the fun in a way. I think I lost track of your initial question.
How do you decide on the size of a sculpture? Because some of them are huge, they're monumental. Is it you who decides that, or the people who commission you?
Typically the artist has that. In public art, the artist has that opportunity or responsibility, however you want to put it. One of the things that's really different, you asked a question earlier about working, was it harder to work in residential or private work than public art? One thing, there is one difference in if you're working with a private client, the private client may be more inclined to try to influence what the artist does. Now, I don't have a problem with that, because usually if I've been selected by an owner to build a piece of art, they already are pretty invested in what I do. They could hire anybody. They don't have to hire me. So we're typically on a pretty similar page. What I try to do is bring some form to their vision, and I can do that without making compromises, I feel. And then sometimes the clients really bring a lot of energy and ideas to a project, and it becomes maybe a little lopsided collaboration, more mine than theirs. But there's an infusion of energy from the client that's I find very engaging, and usually works out really well to the benefit of the project. In public art, there's usually very little influence from the from the commissioning agency. The artist is truly free to do what they want to do. That said, in public art, it will often say in the request for qualifications, no political art, no social art, or whatever. And so there's the people responsible for allocating the taxpayers' money for a piece of sculpture do not want to offend the taxpayer, and that's understandable. There's an old saying, you can't please all the people all the time, and there will always be people that do not like whatever gets built. But hopefully those people are in the minority, and I've really never had any controversies. I think one of the reasons my work is appealing to a cross section of people is that while I appreciate art with social content and whatnot, it's not in my wheelhouse to do that. I really enjoy creating beautiful forms, pieces that become landmarks in a community, and I think that makes me a good fit for doing public art. There sometimes complications with the fact that governmental agencies are not very nimble. It's not uncommon for me to win a competition for a commission, and then it's a year later, something like that, before a city council gets around to approving a contract or allocating funding or whatnot. The piece that we just installed a week ago was held up for 4 years by a budgetary dispute between the governor and the state legislature, along with billions of other dollars worth of state contracts or everything. And then it got held up again by COVID. So there's all sorts of interruptions and delays that happen working in a public sector. If you're working for a resident or residential client or corporation, it's usually they can't have it fast enough. So as a small business, I'm more nimble than a governmental agency, and sometimes that's a little bit of a misfit, because I want to build this now, not next year, not 3 years from now. And I have had the experience of building pieces years after they were designed, which sort of feels funny because my work is an evolutionary process. I think of each sculpture as sort of a chapter in a book, and sometimes I'm not working in the same chronological order that I designed the work in.
Residential art, I was wondering if we could touch a little bit on the function art that you do.
For residential clients, I've done both fairly large sculpture. I can think of 3-4 pieces right now that I've done for clients, the outdoor sculpture. But we do, like I said, we do the decorative architectural metalwork, such as railings, gates, lighting fixtures, chandeliers, fire screens, fire tool sets. And I enjoy those processes. When I'm working at the forge, I was just telling one of my employees the other day, it's sort of my happy place. It's, there's just nothing like a hot piece of metal in the forge and stand over the anvil and shaping it with a hammer. It's a very intimate kind of a process. You're to do it right, do it well, you have to, spend years and years developing those skills. When you're doing it, you have to be in a zone. You just the total concentration. Every hammer blow is a decision. Which way am I pushing this metal? And part of what I enjoy about that is it is an ancient craft, and there's something kind of magical about that. You look at an etching from 500 years ago, and you'll see an anvil, a post vise, and a forge, and a stool, and a file, and a hammer, and it's all the same stuff we still use, and I love that. I've been working at the same anvil for I guess almost 40 years now. I know that anvil. I know what I can do with it. I have probably 5 or 6 anvils in the shop. There's one that everybody in the shop says that's my anvil, and it's kind of lumpy and not flat, and all its little eccentricities that have been developed on that anvil by its probably 150, 200-year history, some of which I've added to, make it a sort of special tool for me, and it can help me manipulate the metal in a way that's kind of unique to my own fingerprint. So that's a nice process. And then I love architecture. You asked me if I had a degree in architecture. No, but I've studied architecture. I've informally, I know a lot of architects. I enjoy looking at buildings, understanding the design philosophies, and I enjoy contributing to architectural projects with my own metalwork. So how the pieces fit, decorative metalwork, you're often dealing with things that are very functional, such as a railing or a tool. So there's an ergonomic aspect to it. You also have to meet building codes, and things have to fit, and they have to look right and be proportional and feel good in the hand and all of that. And as a blacksmith, those are the things that are really fascinating to me. You have to be a bit of an engineer and an artist and a designer and a technician, and a mechanic, all at once, simultaneously.
Let's talk about the people who work with you and for you.
I have been really blessed in the last, I think, 25 years or so that I have been an employer. One of my business decisions was to stay in the Southern Illinois area after finishing graduate school, in part because the metals program at SIU I knew would give me access to like-minded people that were, in the early part of their career and would want to have an opportunity to work in a studio like this that could get experience. And I haven't relied on that entirely for employees, but quite a few of the people that have worked for me over the years have been through that program, and that's been a very good relationship for both the program and for my business. Currently, I have employees. Megan's a studio supervisor here, and she's worked with me for about 10 years now, a little over 10 years. And over that time has really, I think, as a technician, as an artist, as a human being, grown and merged into a working relationship with me that is more kind of unlike any other I've had. She's been here a long time, and she, can understand the design concepts I'm doing, has worked with me on a lot of the detailing of drawings and whatnot. She has helped with innovating some of our processes and making them more efficient and better. So Megan's been a great assistant and working in the studio. We've also collaborated as designers on several projects, and she's a very talented artist in her own right. And so I think that's given my business a little bit more scope and depth. As my other full-time fabricating employee is Sarah Duro, and she graduated from the sculpture program here at SIU maybe 5-6 years ago. She, like me, did an internship at the Metals Museum in Memphis, and but primarily working in the foundry there doing cast metals. She's got a background as education and background in welding as well. So, very talented artist in her own right. Very fastidious craftsperson in the details, which that works well here. So I have another employee named Holden, who is actually a business student and a bit of an artist in his own right as well. He designs his own clothes and other things. He comes from a background of builders. His family business is builds. They have a factory, a small factory, builds custom countertops. So Holden works with my wife and I in the office, primarily managing our computers and IT stuff and helping us with some of the marketing and just throwing ideas around and whatnot. So that's the crew. And then I must mention my wife's contribution to the business. She does the office management role, keeping track of the accounts and payroll and whatnot. But Cynthia also has a background in printing and publishing, and she was a photo editor and researcher at a publishing company in Knoxville years ago. So one of the reasons I've been able to be successful in winning public art commissions is Cynthia is a dynamo of sending out the RFQs, which is not something that I would probably do as much if left to my own devices. So she's a very important part of the business, and together we make a good team.
What do you think about this 3D digital sculpture that some sculptures are using?
I have mixed feelings about that, and it's like anything else. It's a tool, and we are doing that as well. But I typically don't do very much design work in a CAD program. I'm old school. I like scissors and glue and paper and a hammer, and I design with actual real materials. However, without digital technology, a lot of these pieces just couldn't happen. I create the patterns for the sculptures with paper and scissors primarily, sometimes forging. But then I scan those patterns and I digitize them, and we use CNC technology to cut out the parts. From there, we are building by hand, and it takes skill that is only from the human. It's not 3D printed work. 3D technology can be used to make exceptional artwork of great quality, and it can also be used to knock out stuff that's not that great. And I don't think that's any change from any other technology. What does bother me is in public art. You had mentioned it previously a little while ago that you've seen a lot of work that you didn't think was that great. And I think one of the reasons that happens is because of the ease of access of computer technology for building things, that a lot of people can start making large scale sculpture without a whole lot of skill and understanding of materials. They can send silly little drawings to a fabricator and have stuff cut out, and they can paint it and put it on the town square. There's not a great deal of understanding of design or material science and whatnot because they don't do it every day. And I think that that is a misuse of those technologies. But that's not the artist's fault. That's the fault of selection committees that don't understand what they are buying. And it happens. So, you know, I try not to worry about those things and concentrate on doing the work I want to do and the way I want to do it. And we use 3D modeling where it's appropriate, and it can be a great tool. It can allow us to do things that would be cost prohibitive in any other way. But we're not printing these things out. We're hand building. So we do use it in the scaling up and the design processes and whatnot.
If someone would like to discover your art and go on a journey, all over, from north to south or south to north to discover your art, how would you, advise them to proceed to do it?
Well, more of my art is in the southeastern United States than elsewhere. So that would be a start. I've got a lot of work in Tennessee, and there's a couple in Florida, and I don't think there's any in Alabama, Georgia. There's one in Alabama. There's one in Mississippi. There's quite a few pieces in Illinois because I live here. But if you're in Central Washington, there's a piece at Central Washington University. There's a piece in East Lansing, Michigan. So the work is around, and it's my goal to keep making and keep spreading it around. You asked, does the client, dictate the size or the content or what have you? And I will answer the thing about size. That usually is budget related, or some constraint of the space that the sculpture is going to be in. I try to design something appropriate for the space. As far as content, sometimes I will have public art request that, ask for something specific. I'll give you a specific example. We did a piece for, and I say I collaborate with another artist, Erica Strecker, on a piece for a children's hospital. And they asked in the RFQ for the artist to design work that referenced the cultural history of the state of Kentucky. And we thought about that for a minute. And the state of Kentucky is famous for horse racing and bourbon and tobacco and all the things that go along with that really aren't appropriate for children. So this was a piece for a children's hospital. So we really thought about what is appropriate for children. And we designed a sculpture of giant kites floating through the atrium. The surface of the kites had marbles in them in clear Lexan tubes to project light and color and have a reference to childhood as well. And that piece was accepted unanimously by their committee and was enormously well received. So sometimes the artist has to take chances with how people will perceive the art. When it comes to abstract work, I often have people ask me, what does that mean? What is that about? Or they will just tell me, I see an eagle in that, whatever reference it would be. And then that's fine. Abstract work can be interpreted by the viewer. And, I build these pieces with the anticipation that people will approach this work with curiosity, and if it captivates them, they'll take the time to really look at it and investigate it, maybe be inspired by it. The piece we just installed out by the airport was titled Velociphy. It's at the SAU Transportation Education Center. It's where students are learning how to design aircraft and electric cars and trains. And so the sculpture really reflects my interpretation, as I told a reporter, the architecture of motion and things that go fast and the contours of jet aircraft and aerodynamics. And I invested those qualities into the design, and I actually did have one of the graduate students walk by and ask me, well, what does that mean? And I just told him that, and, it's an aviation student. And he goes, oh, okay. So, I think if he had taken the time to look at it without asking me, he would have figured it out. People become, excited about the forms they see. I think as human beings, we're all have the capability to recognize a beautiful thing when we see it. And so I invite people to examine the work and see what they want to see in it for themselves. And most of the time, people think that what they see come out of my studio is really awesome, and they love the work. So we occasionally do representational work. Megan and I sculpted mascots of Saluki dogs for the campus at SIU a couple of years ago. So very representational cast bronze work, which is not in our usual work, but something that we're capable of doing. I actually have the model right here for the Voyage sculpture. This is a 1/12 scale model of that piece. Part of our studio practice is restoration and conservation of metal sculpture. As I mentioned earlier, I started my career working at the Metals Museum, and that museum background introduced me to the world of conservation. I worked in 2 other museums as well in college and graduate school times. So we occasionally do some fairly large and involved restoration of even contemporary but more historical type pieces. A couple of years ago, we restored a World War I monument. We've done a Ruth Duckworth piece. We restored an Ernest Trova piece. So I enjoy bringing things of merit back from the brink. It's an interesting process to investigate how another artist made a piece of work. Maybe it was 100 years ago or more, and it's an interesting process. Sometimes you'll find registration marks, how things go together, and I want to thank that guy for putting that mark on there 100 years ago. Nothing goes without need of maintenance and repair. I hope that at some point in the future, people will take the time to do restoration and maintenance on the pieces I build today. It's an interesting aspect of what we do in the studio. It's not my major focus, but I do enjoy those projects from time to time. It's kind of like you have a conversation with an artist from another century. It's fascinating to me. There are oftentimes we get a piece in that somebody has done a bad repair on, and so part of the task is to undo the damage that was done, maybe out of good intentions, but from an uneducated point of view. But we've restored a couple of fountains from the 1800s, and sculpture from the 1970s, and even as late as the 80s or 90s. So just one more thing that rounds out our studio practice. and it's informative to me to work on these things. And I began this process working at the Metals Museum. It educates me on how not to build things. Like, why do things break? Where does oxidation occur in a joint? Those kind of things. So working on historic pieces, and you see where the problems develop, it actually influences my approach to design, because I can see things that can cause trouble. Does a sculpture drain? Did this bolt rust in place and you can't get it out? Those kind of things. So all of that where it kind of circles back to the way that I'm designing pieces now. And you always wonder when you put a sculpture out in a public place, it's still going to be here 100 years from now, 200 years from now. You never know. So, but we do restorations, and it's part of our work. Well, one thing I would like to add, I've mentioned the Metals Museum in Memphis a few times. Full disclosure, I serve on the board of that institution now. And one thing I would really encourage, if people are interested in the contemporary metal arts, blacksmithing, sculpture, jewelry making, casting, that if they can go to Memphis, take the time to go visit the Metals Museum. It's a very interesting institution. We have exhibitions that are cycling through constantly, so there are new things to see. And there's a full working foundry and blacksmith studio on the premises. The location is on the bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. It's a really beautiful place. And full circle for me, the first college I went to in Memphis was the Memphis Academy of Arts. It later changed its name to the Memphis College of Arts, and unfortunately suffered some financial mishaps 2 or 3 years ago and went bankrupt, leaving a huge building in the middle of Memphis without an occupant. And so we are involved in the beginning stages of moving the main operations of the museum to that building, which will expand gallery space and educational services and community investment in the institution. So if you're in Memphis, go check that out. You'll learn a lot about metalwork.